Oh, human is illegal, they chant. These are people who do not know what these words mean. They're speaking the words, they don't respect the language. Human being means a state of being humane. You're a Homo sapiens by default. They're mistaking the word human for the word Homo sapiens. The second point is illegal. Do you know the difference between legal and illegal? That's the first point. Because if no human being is illegal, then all of the people who commit crimes are not illegal. That's where that argument falls apart. But more fundamentally than that, do you know the difference between legal and lawful? Because Britain, the law-abiding citizens of Britain at least, are aware, because of being a part of British civilization, the difference between lawful and legal. No human being is unlawful unless they commit a crime against the law. Legality is the legislation, it's the acts of Parliament, which are given the force of a law by enforcement. It's not the same thing. So a human being who is not a citizen of Great Britain, who is not a member of that society, is by default illegal in Britain because they're outside of the legal system, because the legal system only governs the citizens, who are therefore legal. This is how some Homo sapiens, or as they put it, humans, are illegal. They're outside of the law not because they're criminals, but because they're not members of that society, because they've got no ID, national identity. They're not nationals. This concept of a British national, those people are under the law. In practice, because practicality outweighs idealism, in practice, there is an existing system for dealing with criminals, illegals, unlawfuls. That's in place. There are people who are more expert in it than the layman, practical experience of doing it, whether they're corrupt or not because of their inside an echo chamber, which is a huge argument, is not something I'm going to deal with at this time. There is an infrastructure there to deal with people in the category of being not British citizens in Britain, and they have to be dealt with lawfully. The legal process tells the state workers how to process illegal immigrants. And it's done with the same rule of law that's applied to citizens, because it's a just country. Obviously, they can't export a citizen on the basis of them being an illegal immigrant, because they're not an illegal immigrant. So they're using a different part of the law, different part of the legislation. It has to be under law. The common law of my ancestors, as taught to me by my grandfather, and this goes all the way back to before the Romans arrived in Britain, because my bloodline were here before the Romans arrived in Britain. The common law of my ancestors is do not harm, do not cause harm, do not steal, do not use trickery in your dealings, which means do not lie, do not manipulate, and keep the peace. Those 4 bullet points. That is the common law of Britain. That's the law. That's the common law of my ancestors. The legislation is everything they do in Parliament, which gets the force of a law by the way it's enforced. Whether they enforce it or not is a grey area for the individual to discern whether that's happening. There are protocols which should but are not always abided by. And that's the situation. So that's debunked this idea that there's no such thing as an illegal human. Humans can't be illegal, because they can, and they are. And by behaviour, you might not be a human. You think you are. You're a Homo sapiens. You're a kind of ape. That does not make you human, because to be a human, you have to behave. It's a being, human being. It's a state of being. It's your behaviour. It's your attitudes. It's how civilised you are. Now, the British attempt to civilise people into a certain way of being. That's British civilization. It's quite a different thing than Australian civilization, or French civilization, or Japanese civilization, and so on and so forth. Those are all national systems which civilize people towards a state where they are civil. They can live in a civic way. The British legal system was largely imported from Denmark. I'm not talking about the law system, the common law of my ancestors. I've explained that. The legal system. It is an adaptation of the old guild system. Now, what happened in Denmark after the Viking era is they got sorted out enough, they got civilized enough that they had a guild system. Now, the guild system was training apprenticeships. You'd be in whatever guild was relevant to what you do as a profession. And for this to work, they had a thing called guilders. Now, guilders is a mutation of the word gold, which they used as coin, as a monetary system. The guilder, I don't know for certain. I don't know if it was actually literally gold coins. I believe it was some other less precious metal with the official stamp of the guilds, which was used. So in theory, again, I'm not an expert on this part of it, if it was from the Fisherman's Guild, it would have a fish stamped on it, and on the other side it would say 1 or 10 or 100 or whatever that coin was worth in its weight in gold. So gold was the foundation. These things were not called gold, they were called guilders, hence the guild system. We use the word, if something is plated in gold, we'd call it gilt. So what would happen if a person was entered into the town or the country and they weren't from around there? They'd be dragged in front of the sheriff or the nobleman or the judge or the jarl or whatever it was, the boss figure, who'd want to know, who are you and what are you doing here? Why are you in our region? Because of keeping the peace. They want to know who's there. And the person would say, I'm here under duress. I just happened to cross the hill. Now, are you going to rob anyone, burn anything, rape anyone, or cause any trouble? Or can we trust you? Because if we can trust you, you're going to pay into our system. Because whilst you're here, you will be using our money. So what have you brought to the table? Because you're receiving our hospitality, something is expected in an exchange. This is the theory behind it, which is a humane way of being, I think. Because then you haven't got barbarians invading you. You've got people who are actually willing to support the organisation structure of the communities and the civilization you've got, which in this case was the guild system using guilders. If somebody did a crime, they'd be dragged in front of the jarl or the judge or the boss, the sheriff or whatever, who would say, how do you plead? Which is a form of begging. Pleading it's not a statement of asserting your authority, it's a plead. Please, you're begging. How do you beg before me, ye criminal, or ye who stands accused of being a criminal? And there were two options. It was, I'm going to put money into the guild system to prove that I'm a member of society. In which case, okay, that's your light sentence. You've paid for the crime that you've committed. You stole their sheep, you've given them money to buy a new sheep with, and a bit of money to pay everybody who's here to judge you. That's why it's called pleading guilty. It's called pleading gold or guilder. I'm a member of the guild community. or at least I'm going to give money into that community in order to make amends for the wrongdoing that I have done. If the person pleaded that they were not part of the guild system, they had no money or were not prepared to put money into the system, then they'd get a harsher punishment, which could be that they were put to death. It could be that they'd be expelled from the lands. It could be that they'd put in a hole in a dungeon somewhere. It could be that they put into slavery. It could be that they'd be branded or have a body part cut off, whatever. And I imagine that different Jarls had different ways of dealing with this until it became more standardised based on the growing ideology of equality, which emerged because of the guild system. A version of that emerged in Britain because of the Danish coming over. It was the Dane law. It's a mutation of the Dane law. It then evolved, adapted to the needs of the British, and it became the foundation of British law, which is why we still have the plea of guilty or not guilty. But the thing that has happened in that historic time, in the hundreds of years, is the word has mutated its meaning in Britain, so that you're taught wrong. You're taught that the word not guilty means innocent, and that the word guilty means, well, guilty. But that's how indoctrinated you are into thinking that word has its own meaning. What does guilty mean? It means I feel terrible for the crime I've committed and I want to make amends. Do you feel that? Do you plead that that's where you are at? But that's not actually what it means at law. What it means is, are you going to give us money, or are you not going to give us money, in which case we'll send you to jail or put you on in chains, or make you chip rocks away, or kick you out the country, or cut your heebie-jeebies off, or whatever the appropriate punishment is. In the case of immigrants, kicking them out of the country, unwanted people who are causing problems, is historically all over the world a way it was dealt with. There is a problem with that, is because all the people you kick out of your country go up to the mountains and form a bandit gang, and they start raiding the villages on the edge of the nation. That's historically part of the deal. And then you've got to send your warriors into no man's land to clean up the bandits, at which point you say, well, since we're policing no man's land, it's now part of our empire, and the bandits who live there, and the people who live there who are not bandits, but they just see the bandits all the time because the bandits are there, so they have to deal with them, and they inbreed with them. They want it to be their own nation, and they don't want to be invaded. And then you get problems then between these two groups until one of them splats the other one down. Typically, the one that's more organised splats down the one that's less organised and more bandity, is the idealistic theory on it. I'm sure there's exceptions, but that is generally the rule of it, which makes more sense to more people in understanding this. So that's the situation we have. So if someone's gone to court in Britain or in the US or in wherever the Dane law has stretched to, which is the Nordic people's way of thinking, white people's way of thinking, of organising themselves into a society, and in this case a skill and trade-based society, which is called civilization, because the process of adapting to that civilises you. Because if you are antisocial, you get penalised for it. It's based on, have you got enough coins to chip into the system that you've just exploited and to put back into the community that you've just exploited in some way, whatever way that might be. It's up to the Jarl or the judge or the sheriff or whoever it is to decide, well, look, the only reason that person stole the apples out of the orchard is because they had starving children to feed. That's not such a bad crime as stealing the apples maliciously to harm the other person's income because they're an apple trader. You know, there are areas where it needs a human, compassionate decision to be made about the severity of the punishment. But it's what it comes down to. The word gilda means putting money into the system. It does not mean I feel terrible. And this is why, if you read newspaper reports about high-profile trials where somebody gets charged, they will often bear a character witness to how the person responded to being told the charges, which is that, the murderer seemed callous, he laughed when he was told he was going to get a life sentence. It's quite different from the guy or the woman was remorseful and cried when being told a life sentence. Those are two different character profiles. That's to give an insight into the person's emotional and psychological makeup. Even if the crime was the same and the punishment was the same, which is they have been found guilty or they've pleaded guilty. Because if you don't plead guilty, you plead not guilty, you're saying I'm not going to give money to you, which the Law Society very often interprets to be they're being told to fuck off, because it pays their wages and doesn't, it's a way of making amends through the economic system. Then traditionally you'd have a jury of your peers. And this is the query about the word peer. What exactly is a peer? Because if somebody is illegal alien, their peers are not the citizens. And this is a technicality. What if you've got an outside expert from the next country over to come into your country who knows how to mend windmills? His peers are millers and engineers who work on stuff like windmills. They're his peers, or her peers. The use of the word peer means the ones you rub shoulders with. Well, I don't rub shoulders with half the kinds of people who might end up on a jury. None of us do, because society has got so many different types of people. My peers are the people who know me, who will vouch for me, or the people who think they know me, and for whatever reasons, jealousy usually, will probably speak against me. That's a different thing to, in Britain, in the traditional court thing that we had up until Lammy tries to remove it for the Labour Party under Starmer, is that your peers were 12 people dotted from all over society at random. So they're not actually my peers. I don't know any train drivers. I don't know any middle managers in governance, so to speak. Perhaps I do, I don't know. It's the practical interpretation of that is 12 random people from society. They're from the same society, they're around, they'll do the job, that's what you're getting. It's deemed to be the fairest way to do it. Lammy is Labour, Starmer has got rid of that, and apparently we don't have that in Britain anymore, even though there's reports coming back that the courtrooms are empty, like 3 days a week. So their excuse that there's not enough time slots in the court to process the amount of crimes they're having, that's why they have to get rid of juries of peers and just have one judge make the decision on the day, is bogus. So it's authoritarianism failing, and that's why they're so hated, trying to take away what is actually a right. You have a right to a trial by jury. It's a right. They've taken that away from you. You no longer have the right that you used to have because of state overreach. This is a reason Starmer's being accused of being a dictator. That's the changing situation in Britain in 2026. So there you go. Can a person be illegal? Yes, a person can be illegal. A person can be illegal and lawful at the same time. A person can be illegal and unlawful at the same time. A person can be legal and lawful at the same time. Although the curious quadrant here would be a person who is legal but unlawful. I don't think that can exist. In practice, however, and this is where it comes down to it, the common law of my ancestors, one of those is do not use trickery in your dealing. Now, trickery is any form of manipulation. Well, the whole idea that you can change the meaning of a word so that you think it means something it doesn't mean, the whole idea that the one rule applies to one group of people but not to another group of people, all of that involves trickery. It's Orwellian doublethink. It's thinking you mean one thing when you actually are talking about meaning the opposite thing. all of that comes under trickery. Oh, but it's necessary. Is it really? Or have you been tricked into thinking it's necessary? And I'm going to leave you with that.